Welcome back to another episode of the Ducks on Base podcast. We are starting our off-season review and slash preview for the 2026 team. Um, we're gonna every episode we're gonna go through and talk about a guy that's projected to return for next season and kind of our recap of how they did last year, as well as our kind of outlook for them going into the 2026 season. For this first episode, we'll be starting with our starting second baseman, Ryan Cooney. And Fox will kick us off with that discussion.
So Ryan Cooney coming into 2025 was he played some games prior to that in 2024. He had 47 games played. He was largely he came in, played second base, played outfield. He was a okay player in 2024. He had a very much better 2025 though as the starting second baseman. He played 57 games, racked up a impressive 335 batting average, 445 on base percentage, and a 500 slug that totals to a 945 OPS, which is one of the top on the teams. He played very good defense at second base most of the time. He was a valuable member of the lineup, usually in that 8 spot, often getting on base. Walked more than he struck out, and had a semi-productive time in the Cape Cod League with the Bourne Braves, totaling 29 games played. He's batting .227, an OBP of .289, slug of .239, with a .527 OPS. I mean, that could be better, but I mean, he's playing against much tougher competition and will likely potentially give him a boost up going into next year.
Yeah. The self-proclaimed 8 merchant, as part of the 8-9 merchant at the bottom of the lineup, has served as a very valuable piece of the lineup in terms of flipping the lineup over and getting on base to flip the lineup over to create opportunities with runners in scoring position with guys like Neville, Hellman, Walsh, and Anson, all at the top of the order. He was pretty much a mainstay in the lineup, which was a good thing to see. Was able to build rapport with his fellow infielders for the most part. They all came back from 2024, so it was overall, I thought he had a very productive season.
Yeah, he was definitely a key part into the Oregon lineup. He was a at large addition to the first team Big Ten, and I expect him to be an important piece in the team moving forward. As we all know, Oregon's losing a lot of production. Primarily, they're losing 2 infielders, their first baseman, Jacob Walsh, and their third baseman, Carter Grotti. Both went to the MLB, and they're losing 2/3 of their starting outfield at the end of the season, with Arrows leaving and Neville leaving. So it's basically going to be primarily is going to be dependent on how Drew Smith, how Max Maloney, how Ryan Cooney become either at least doing the same level as they were this year, and also moving forward into next year, potentially increasing those numbers, making it so the loss of so many productive players is less effective.
Yeah. Would you say like obviously like we can't predict the future? Would you say he stays at the 8 hole next year, or would you say they might like tinker around and like move him up in the lineup?
I'd say it's probably he's gonna move up in the lineup. I'd say maybe like 5-6 area where Max Maloney is, maybe even further depending on how he does in the fall. I'd predict probably it's going to be some. I expect Hellman to stay around like 3 or 4, like he was this year. I expect Maloney, as we'll talk about in our next episode, um, will likely move up into the 1-2 spot, and maybe Drew Smith will move up as well, as Drew Smith does have some um, uh, leadoff batting experience that he had in
Yeah,
the past.
yeah, definitely with a lot of um, departures from this Oregon starting lineup. It will definitely be interesting to see where returners like Maddox Maloney, Drew Smith, and Ryan Cooney, which we'll talk about in subsequent episodes, like Fox has mentioned, where they'll be in the lineup and how much production can they bring to largely what would be um, a new team in terms of starters.
Yeah, I think moving on, I think primarily it's just going to be seeing. I think his biggest thing that I would like to keep going into this next year is likely that OBP. The on
Yeah,
base percentage definitely helped, especially in that middle of the season when they started going on that run after beating Michigan and Oregon State. I think the biggest thing that helped them was getting guys on for Mason DeVille to hit home runs for, applying the pressure, making sure that they can't walk Neville without potential like harm later down in the lineup. Um, I mean, it'd be amazing if he managed to improve his slugging to be able to get that OPS over a 1 dot, and that would basically mean that he'd be like a top player going into
yeah,
next year's draft.
yeah, and definitely I think guys that usually come back from the Cape Cod um, improve in one way or another, and I would not. I would be pretty confident in saying that Ryan Cooney will be taking a next step going into next year after facing the talent he did this year in the Cape Cod League.
Um, I think, in conclusion, I think Ryan Cooney was definitely an impact player. He's going to be, I'd say, probably the second or the third most important player coming into next season that we're going
Agreed.
to talk about. The next player I think is going to the next player that we're talking about in our next episode, Max Maloney, I think is going to be the most important. But overall, I think Cooney's definitely going to be an impactful and an exciting player for us going into next year. I think what he and Maloney do to help shore up the team through leadership, through batting, through their fielding will largely be a determining factor in what Oregon does next year.
Yep. A veteran leadership will definitely be an important factor with largely an inexperienced team projected for next year. And Ryan Cooney will definitely bring that leadership aspect, considering he is a 3-year veteran of this team. So, with that being said, thank you for listening to this episode of the Ducks on Base podcast. As always, we are on Spotify and YouTube. Make sure to like and subscribe. We are also on Instagram and Twitter. So follow along for additional bonus content that we'll post throughout the weeks. And as always, go Ducks and make sure to stay tuned for our next episode.